All right, this is a very, very exclusive little event. 7 people, so you are among the chosen. You all understand English, I hope, because I don't speak Russian. You speak English as well? You'll have to. I'll make you. So, I don't know what you expect from the next couple of hours. If I talk too fast, if I say something that you don't understand, just make a note or just sort of give me a sign and I'll try to explain. You move up here because we don't like people sitting on. Huh? Are you fine there? Okay. My name is Steinar. I've been invited to come to St. Petersburg by TOC, the Association of Creative Curators, who had this conference yesterday up at the Etажи, and there was a workshop this morning. Did anyone participate in that workshop? You were there? No?
This morning?
No, yeah. Today there was a workshop on experience design.
Yes, I was.
You were there? Okay, good. By Fernando Torres from Sweden.
Yes.
So Fernando and I, we've been asked to come and share some of our ideas and experiences and some of the thinking that is currently going on in Scandinavia in the design sort of community. And just to tell you a little bit about myself so that you know where I'm coming from. Originally I'm from Norway, but moved to Denmark in 1989, so many, many years ago. I worked with design. I'm not a designer, I'm an economist. I worked with design for the last almost 30 years. First in industry, different manufacturing companies who use design for product development, for visual branding, for all the communication for their spaces. So I've been buying design from designers, and I've been working very closely with designers for around 10 years. And then I moved into the design industry and became director of a brand design agency where we made visual identity and packaging design for Lego and House of Prince and Danish Crown and some of the very big manufacturers, especially of fast-moving consumer goods, food and toys and that kind of stuff. And then in 2000 I moved from the design industry and into an organization called Danish Designers, which is the Association of Professional Designers in Denmark. And that was about 1,000 designers, graphic designers, product designers, industrial designers, interior architects, textile designers, not fashion, but almost all other kinds of designers than fashion designers. And I was director at Danish Designers from 2000 and until last year in 1st of November, where I decided to step back because after 12 years I felt that, okay, I've done my share. So I decided to become a little bit more sort of loose and free. So right now I have a half-time job where I manage a project which is funded by the European Union, which is about design management. You know the concept of design management? It's basically the management discipline for managing design processes and making design processes part of large organizations. So it's not the designing, but it's the management of the design processes. And the project I work with right now is about taking the knowledge that we have on design management, which is taken from the private sector, from large companies. And then we try to take that experience and process it and make a model for how public sector organizations can work with design management. Meaning how hospitals, how municipalities or regions or government offices can work with creative processes and make them part of the way they work. So that's what we're doing now. I have a 3-year project funded by the European Union. We just passed the first year milestone. And what we're doing now is that we're making sort of a model for how to do that. And the rest of the time I do all kinds of other stuff. I do workshops like this, and both for designers and for industry leaders and for politicians and for whoever. I write. I'm just now writing a book together with 5 other European experts. It's a book on the creative industries, and I write the part which is about design. And I do some consultancy where I'm engaged in a project where we're developing a learning platform for design and innovation for schools. I'm part of a project to develop an innovation center for literature. What else am I? I'm engaged in a project in Africa, in Mali, in Africa, to teach young people who come from the farming industry and who wants to, for example, make fruit juices or some kind of agricultural product, and how they can make that a professional product in terms of packaging it, distribution, making a marketing plan and a business plan for it and all that. So I'm doing all kinds of stuff. And today what I will do is that I will share some of my thinking and experiences on what is going on in the design industry and what that could mean to you. Okay? Good. So far so good. What we will go through, what we will do today. I have made a time plan, but since we're so few, we'll just take it as it comes. We'll make it very sort of impromptu. But I want to go through these, 6 different issues, one way or another. One is the development of design practice. How has design developed? That will be sort of one way. I will tell you how this looks based on a research project on what role design actually has played over the last 60, 70 years. Then we'll talk about the motivational drives. Why is it that designers become designers? Which challenges are waiting out there which could be interesting for you to look at? What can we expect from design practice, and what will the world expect from you as designers in the future? Part of that is the individual versus the collective. That I guess most of you are, in principle, you are trained as an individual designer, while more and more designers move into value chains. They become part of large projects with all kinds of other people. And then this last one, which is about reframing and finding your identity as a designer. It sounds very, very sort of technical. It sounds like we will be here for 6 days. We will not. We will go through this in about 2.5 hours because we will finish around 9. Is that okay? No one has appointments before that or anything? Good. So that's this is sort of the time schedule for it. We've been through the introductions now, and so we're already behind schedule. Then I'll go through this development of design practice, and then we have a little exercise, and that is about the most important issues for the design community right now. And I want you to come up with some ideas on how we can deal with that. We'll have a break. We won't have coffee because there is no coffee. There is tea. But so there is tea, it's not coffee. Then we have an exercise more after the break where we'll talk about this. What is it that made me be a designer? Why is it that people become designers, and what is the good reason to become designers? And then we will look at some of the many different areas where designers could actually play a role. And then we come to this framing, and then we'll sort of try to write another one at the end and see if it's the same as it says now. Okay? Good. What I will do is that I will go about 70 years back and drag you through history. So I'll basically try to move us all through the thinking that design has moved from being this arts and crafts movement to an environment where we talk about design in a totally different manner. Now we talk about design-driven systemic innovation. We're talking about design as a means to a bigger goal. And the question, of course, is what do we talk about next year, or in 5 years, or in 10 years? So, based on that, I'll try to sketch some of the challenges that I see for designers and for the design profession, some of the barriers for making you as useful as you could be out there, but some of the opportunities as well for designers, which are definitely there and which should not be missed. And then some reflections on how design is, what design is currently in Europe. So this is all based on a thesis. I think it looks very much the same as I see things, but it's always good to have some research to support your thinking on. So this research was done by a Finnish lady called Anna Valtonen, and she is now a rector at the design school in Umeå in Sweden. And this design university in Umeå in Sweden is today among the 10 best design schools in the world. So it's a very important sort of institution for developing the design area. In the 50s, she says, and she has tried to find out not what design was, but what was the most important agenda when we talked about design throughout the last 70 years. So when we talked about design and what design was in the 50s, it was very much about arts and crafts. It came from the craftsmanship. It was a trade that moved in and became a little bit more sort of structured. Very often it was moved by the architects actually, and it came from the very, very physical, aesthetical trades of making beautiful stuff. In Europe, it was very much about reconstruction, because this was right after the war. So it was about how can design and architecture be part of building a new society after the war. So there was a big scale discussion and agenda. It was also about national identity. If you look at design from the 50s, you can clearly see whether it's Italian design, or if it's Danish design, or if it's Dutch design or German design. The designs from that era reflects the identity and the image that that culture wanted on itself. And it also reflected a lot of aspirations. You know the word aspiration, ambition, dreams, visions. Because after the war, there was this thinking that, okay, now we've really been in deep shit, right? Let's do the right thing now. So let's build a more sensible, a more meaningful society. So there was a lot of aspirations on what could this society look like. And then it went better some places than other places. But there was a big sort of agenda on what kind of society do we want. And it coincided with the fact that in the 50s there was the emergence of a lot of new materials. Plastic was not a new material because it came earlier, but plastic was for the first time moving into industry as a common material. Someone doesn't have a dream here. Then one more. Okay. So plastic came in, plywood, the fact that you could work with plywood so that you had, the bent wood chairs and all these things. All that came in the 50s. And there were also some new technologies. There were actually new manufacturing methods that came in the 50s, which made all kinds of new products possible. And globalization. We talk about globalization today as if it is something new. But that was also something which actually came as part of the unification of the Western world after the Second World War. So there were a lot of big issues here, and all of this was carried by the architects and architecture. Design was very much a corner of architecture. When architects made big buildings, they also made the chairs to fit into the building, and then made the door handles, and they made the tableware for that project. So at this time, designer was not actually a professional identity. At least very few people recognized themselves as designers. They were architects or they were artists, and they worked with designing things or graphics. In the 60s, well, before that, iconic design. When we think about design from the 50s, it is very much about icons, design icons. We have Alvar Aalto, we have Arne Jacobsen, we have Eero Saarinen, we have some of the big masters. And that was what design was about. They were sort of people who really made statements on behalf of the time they were living in. In the 60s, we moved into an area of much more hardcore industrial design, which means that design moved from the wood shop or the sort of the little shop of the designer or architect himself, out of the studio and into the factories, where design became part of a process where there were also engineers, and there were some people who were marketing people, and there were some others who were part of a sort of a whole, and the designer became suddenly a part of this. In the 70s, because I'm not going as detailed through the all, because we would go on forever, in the 70s, focus was very much on ergonomics and user analysis. It was about, okay, we've made chairs now for many years, but what about the body? How do we actually accommodate the body? How do we make design that fits two people? And one of the reasons why that was so important in the 70s is that in 1969-70, the first design research came. Before that, design research didn't exist. So the first time we talk about design research as a field in itself was around 1970. And that research was very much about what is the difference between products that have been made by designers or according to a design method and products which have just been made. So it was very much about what is the actual difference between design and non-design. And then before we take the 80s, because they are also there, this is not a linear thing. This is not like we had the 50s and then they went to the 60s and then there were no more 50s. This is like an onion. This is the 50s, and then suddenly we got a new layer, which is the 60s and the 70s, and then you have the core. But for every decade, there's a new layer being put onto the design concept. In the 80s, design management came about as a concept, which meant that design moved from the manufacturing units and also up into the management domains of companies. It became interesting to people who were talking about long-term strategies for companies. What role will design play for us in the next 5, 10 years? How can design be a part of our identity? How can it be part of the way we build our company? So we moved out of the craft and into something much more theoretical. And in the 90s, it was very much about branding. Design as a way of differentiating one product from another or one company from another, how you brand an organization. And in the 2000s, or the zeros, which we just sort of put behind us, it was all about innovation. Design as a means to create innovation. And what is innovation? Well, that's just this open question as what is design, but I think most people talk about innovation as finding new ways of solving problems. It's not just about making something which looks differently, but also something which solves a problem in a different way than before. So it became much more about how you do stuff instead of what things look like. And that's why design in the last 10, 15 years really changed its face, because until then it was very much about physical objects. You could design a chair, or you could design a pen, or you could design some graphics, or you could design, but it had to be something which was sort of identifiable. You could say, I like it or I don't like it. It's good design or it's not good design. And from there, design moved into being a way of working, a process, a method. Where we talked about design as a way of co-creating. Design as a way of engaging people into a creative process. And say, so there are some people out there, we are designers, but we don't have the answer. They have the answers. Our role is to help them sort of bring solutions to the table, and then we can polish them and help them make them good. It was very much about the users, and say, it's not what we as designers want, it is what the users need, and how users react, and how users resonate and engage with products, services, and experiences. We moved from design as being this only material thing to also designing services, to designing experiences, to designing relations, to designing value chains. So it became suddenly a much more open issue. And that's why in about 2004-05, suddenly everyone started talking about service design. What is service design? Do you have an idea? What is service design? If I ask you. Does anyone have a... Yeah, it's very much about user experience. And it's used especially in terms of how you develop an interaction between a client or a patient or a customer and the system that delivers this service. So it can be how you make the experience of giving blood more sort of easily accessible, less painful, more attractive, because you want people to go give blood. So how do you make that experience of giving blood more interesting, more accessible? That is a service design challenge, for example. And then we talked about strategic design. So design, how design could help solve overall big issues like how do we make people reuse materials? How do we make people use less energy? How do we make people do this or that? It was much more about how we make things happen instead of making it as such. In the US, one of the companies that were very sort of progressive with this is IDEO. They're still very well known. Do you know IDEO? You should check it out because it's interesting. I think it's ideo.com. But they have introduced many of the sort of techniques and the thinking around this. And they talk about T-shaped designers. And what is a T-shaped designer? Well, it is basically they want, or they say, for designers to actually work with challenges of this kind. You need a different kind of designer than what we had previously. Because until now, and still, designers are very often very focused on the material and the creation itself. But what IDEO says is that what we need people who look like this, meaning that there are all kinds of issues you need to know something about to be a good designer. You need to know something about users and psychology and sociology and anthropology and all these. You need to know something about manufacturing or about distribution and about and you need to know something about economy and basically you need to know a little bit of everything. But then on this line of things that you need to know, there is one thing you need to know very well and better than the others, and that is how to actually take the thinking and make it into tangible solutions. That's what we were talking about. We're talking about superhumans. You are the new breed of superhumans. And we were talking about multidisciplinarity because we realized that if we want designers to do all this, and to, for example, this is a design which won a lot of prizes. It's not very good looking, this thing here, but it's a fantastic way of loading and unloading aircrafts, because until this machine came, which is called, I can't remember the name of it, but until then, this was what you had. You had a carriage with all kinds of luggage, and it came up here, and then in here there was a man, and he took it from that machine and gave it to someone else, who gave it to someone else, who put it into the sort of furthest corner of the aircraft, because you had to pack this. This thing here, the only thing that it does is that it actually addresses the issue that the people who had that job, they retired in average before they were 50 because their backs were broken and they had to go on sick leave, or they had to, they had to retire. They couldn't do it more than about 15, 20 years. It was too tough on you. So you said, is that reasonable? No, it's not reasonable, and it's extremely costly, both for the airlines and for society. So it basically just said, how can we make this, how can we extend this so that it actually moves into the machine, into the aircraft. So it's just like an elephant's navel. So it extends. When you take it up here, then it's sort of just like this, and you get a belt which you can, with a joystick, you can control it. So instead of someone actually taking the suitcase, you sit here at the opening with the joystick, and then you just control that thing, so that puts the suitcases where you want them to be. So first of all, you save 4 to 5 people. That's really a lot of money to save, and that person who does it can actually work a full life, because this is not something which breaks your back. So there's a lot of different issues of it. So for people like you, for designers to do this instead of making another chair, you need to understand a lot of issues. And you need to understand the complexity of an operation like this. So that's one thing. But what's more important is that you can't do it alone. Alvar Aalto and the others, they basically made the chairs on their own because they made a prototype in the studio. So they could design the finished product on their own. This is something you do together with all kinds of different people, and it's not something you get your name on. It's not something you get royalties from. This is something you do as one out of many people in a multidisciplinary team to solve a big problem. So this was much more the sort of issues that designers focused on in the last decade, and it also meant that design sort of moved a little bit out of focus. In the 80s and 90s, there was a very strong focus on design as something fantastic up there, and in the 2000s, we saw that design sort of became more normalized. It became a discipline within this area which we now call the creative industries. So there are architects, and there are designers, and then there are sound makers, and then there are filmmakers and game makers, and all these people, they work together to solve solutions together. So, and now we're in the 10s. So what are we talking about now? We're talking about design thinking. What is design thinking? Well, that's one of the issues. That's a visual representation of design thinking. It's basically about understanding all the complexity of finding out what is the real issue here, what is the problem, and how do we do this? And then this is what we used to call design. That's the design process. That's to do it. But the design thinking is this part, and the whole idea is that design thinking is not just for designers. Design thinking is a way of thinking which you can adopt from the way that designers always worked, which is good because it means that a lot of people out there, they start understanding what design is. So they start understanding what it is that you know and what you are doing. The bad news is that a lot of them think that they can do it instead of you. They suddenly think that they can do this design thing. They don't need the designers any longer. So we have this challenge right now of making it understandable that yes, you can adopt some of the thinking of designers, but it doesn't make you a designer. But we'll come back to that because that's one of the big challenges we have. Right now we're talking about design-driven innovation. How can design thinking and the way that designers always started addressing problems, how can that be part of the sort of overall approach to finding new ways of doing things? We're talking about social and systemic change. Instead of designing a new waste bin, designers are now expected to design a new way of disposing of litter. Do you understand the difference? So it's not the thing, but it's the system that the thing is part of. So designers are now expected to start relating to the sort of the ecosystem of whatever they work with, not only the singular objects. Sustainable development, obviously, everyone talks about it, but there is a great deal of expectation that designers are actually better at understanding what it can take. And the reason why that expectation is there is that for products, the sustainability sort of effect of a product, that is decided in the design process. When the designer has sort of decided on materials, on joints, on production methods and all that, then all the decisions are actually made which determines whether a product will be sustainable or not. So 80% of all decisions which affects the possibility of reuse, of the life cycle of the product, are determined in the design phase. So it's just reasonable that we say, okay, but then designers need to focus on this because they actually make a whole lot of decisions which are determining factors of whether a product is sustainable or not. Then this public service thing, which I'm working with now, how design can become part. Don't do that. I'll pick it up later. How designers can be part of developing better ways of supplying or of delivering public services within the educational system, within the healthcare system, public transportation, not only the big systems but also signage, for example, in the hospital. We know that by having good visual communication, good wayfinding systems in a hospital, you save up to 15% of the time of the nurses, which they would otherwise use just to point in one or another direction and help people find their way. If you have good communication design in a hospital, nurses and the others don't have to do that. They can focus on what they are actually there to do to help the patients. So we're talking about design being sort of not only adopted by the public sector because they like it, but because the public sector all over Europe, I think that's probably the case in Russia as well, the public sector is expected to deliver more and better services for less and less money. That is the mechanism right now. And the only way of doing that is to do things smarter and make things better designed so that you actually save some operations or time or money in the delivery of the service. So that's one of the biggest issues. I don't know for sure, but we believe that right now in Europe, more than 50% of all design services are bought by the public sector. So the public sector buys more design than the private sector right now. So that is not just a small issue. It's that's for the design community. That is their livelihood. And then we're talking about cohesion and coherence. How can design be part of making societies work? We have societies. You have challenges in Russia. We have challenges in Denmark. We have challenges all over the place with societies becoming more and more complex, more and more multicultural. People coming from Libya and Syria and all over the place and come to Europe because they have a better chance. But we're not necessarily ready to take in all these people. How can we make society more accommodating for differences in diversity? How can we use design to design a better a better society for all? These are big issues. And then we have design as a way of creating economic and urban growth. Growth is the big issue right now. That's the big word. There is no money given from any fund or any government unless they expect it to generate some growth. But growth is not only economic growth, it's also to relate to the fact that people are moving into the cities. So you get bigger and bigger cities, bigger and bigger challenges. How do you deal with that? How can design be part of helping the challenges that give? So as you can see, if you go back to the 50s, we're talking about crafts, we're talking about national identity, we're talking about design as an expression. And here we're talking about design as one central way of solving some of the biggest problems that we have. Are you ready for that? If we want to do this, it requires a lot from us as the design community. First of all, I believe that we have to go back to what design was from the very beginning. What was it that made people develop this field of design, of being a designer? Well, I think that designers have always been advocates for what I would call meaningfulness. A product should not just be nice or good looking, or it should be meaningful. It should mean something to the user. It should be something which felt obvious and natural for the users to relate to. And that is a very strong sort of core quality of design. And I think that we have to find back to what is the design meaningfulness in these new challenges. Design has always been about attractiveness. It's been about making something which was nicer. Not only good looking, but something which felt good. Something which you wanted to have. Something that you wanted to sort of take into your life. And I think that is something that the designers need to hold on to. Yeah, that is what we're good at. That's why we are there. But they can possibly use it in new areas and in new contexts. And then design as a craft. Design is still about making something. It's about taking ideas, and a lot of people can have good ideas, but what designers are good at is taking that idea and make something out of it. Make it work, make it happen. So that the fact that designers they still make that prototype and find out whether it can be made, and then sort of make it ready for production. That is the craft part of design, and that needs to be there. Unless we have that, then there's only the design thinking, and then suddenly a lot of others can do it. You don't have to be a designer. We know that for example, in I read a report recently that children who are being interrogated by the police, for example, if they've been witnessing something. Children are very often witnesses to very serious crime at home or elsewhere. And it's very, very challenging to use children as witnesses, because you don't want to ruin their lives because they have to relive all kinds of stuff. And you want them to be true about what they've seen, not to start fantasizing and all that. What we've seen is that the quality of the testimonials of children is directly related to what the room in which that interview takes place looks like. If that room makes the child feel at ease because it has good light, it has the right sort of tactile sensations, the right materials, the right visual sort of atmosphere, the right temperature, and all these things. If the physical surroundings make the child feel good, the quality of the interviews and the precision of what they tell that they have actually seen is much, much, much higher. And why is that? It's because we all are very sensitive to aesthetical impressions. We don't always sort of recognize it, but the fact is that if an environment is tidy, if an environment is comfortable, people perform better. And that sensitivity to how people resonate, or how aesthetics resonate with people, that is something that designers have always been good at. That's why designers are used in communication, because designers can detect what it takes for people to react and to see and to notice a message. And that is something which I think that there is no one else who's better at doing that than the designers. And we need to keep focus on the fact that designers or a key sort of contribution for designers is to be the specialists in what this aesthetical resonance is all about. And then we have to just make sure that people understand that design is more than design thinking. Design is actually also about design doing. Design is about creating. It's not only about thinking about what could be created. So these are some preconditions for design to actually make that difference that we talked about. This isn't quite interesting. I don't have internet connection here. We tried, but it didn't work. But because otherwise you could have seen it movie. But you can find it on YouTube if you Google piano staircase Stockholm. I think piano staircase Stockholm. You can see it on video. But it's basically an experiment. But we know that at least in Scandinavia, people get fatter and fatter. It's a wealth syndrome. It's a problem. It's not only a problem for individuals. It's also a problem for society because you get diseases and you know all that follows obesity. So you want people to move more. That's an overall ambition of society. And this is just it's basically just an experiment to see what does it take to make people take the stairs instead of taking the escalator. So what they did was that one night when the metro was closed, they made this staircase here, which is like a piano, but there are also sensors underneath these white and black carpets. So when you walk them, there is a tone. And you can see that if you then skip one, you can make a different kind of music. So suddenly people started doing it first just to see, hey, something happens. You know, there's a sound when I walk up instead of take the escalator. And then people started dancing and trying to make music. So suddenly this became a big event that people took the stairs for fun, but also because it gave them a new sensation. And it was just something, there was absolutely no reason to take this. It's not like they have done this in Sweden on all metros because it would be chaotic, and some people think it's terrible because it makes a whole lot of noise. But it's just an example that you can actually change people's behavior by giving them some experiences in their daily lives by doing something which is the materialization of a good idea. Good. So, we have some major challenges. One of the challenges that we have is that education, design education, has very little to do with what I just talked about. Design education is still about making a chair, or about making a nice poster, or about making a nice frock or dress. There is very little strategic, systemic thinking and complexity built into design education. Is that just me, or do you agree? Huh? Strong? It's true. So I think that we have a big challenge. That is actually to take some of this knowledge that we have of what's going on out there and try to build that into design education. I know that's very, very difficult because I am, as one of the many things, I'm vice president of the board of a design school. And I fight for that design school to say, okay, we are here. This is 2013. What we're discussing now, we can probably implement in 2015. The people who start school in 2015, they will graduate in 2020 or 21. And then it will take a year or two before they are sort of ready to make a difference. So we're talking about 2023. So we actually need to be able to see 10 years ahead to develop a design education which meets the needs of society in 2023. That's difficult. And it's very risky. And if there's something people don't like, it's to take risks. So we have a big challenge of most design education actually making education for what they think we need here. But what we need to do is to develop something which solves the needs of society in 10 years' time. Then we have another challenge. I don't know if in Russia, I'm quite sure that a lot of people, engineers and others, they add on to their training with an MBA. You know what an MBA is? A Master of Business Administration. If you have an MBA, you sort of, the world opens up to you, which is good. I have no problem with that. The challenge here is that the whole idea of design thinking has been built into the MBA courses all over the world, which means that a lot of people who have economic training or engineering training and takes an MBA, they also learn design thinking. And that is the big issue here. After having an MBA, they think that they can walk on water, and if they have had a course on design thinking, they also think that they are designers. So we have suddenly a competition from people who are not designers but who have adopted some of the thinking of designers. And we can see it because, do you know companies like KPMG, do you know that? Or Accenture or PA Consulting, some of the large international consultancy houses with thousands of people, offices in New York and all over the world. They are sort of the specialists in solving problems in organizations. They are called in by governments or by big companies to come up with propositions for how you can move on, how you can develop a company, how you can change a company. And right now, I know that at least Accenture, which is one of the biggest, and PA Consulting, they are hiring designers, not to design chairs, but to help them develop design as a service. And I just know that they are very professional. So if they offer design as a service, it will be very difficult for designers to compete with them. And we also need to think about how design can be brought to the market. If we go back, design was something you did on your own risk. Very often you designed a chair or a thing, and then when it was almost finished, you went to a manufacturer, said, do you want this? Can you manufacture this? And the first manufacturer said, no, that's not for us. And then you went to the next one. What about you? Would you like to make my chair then? And then you also said no. And then you said, okay, I'll make it. But on one term, you don't get any money unless it's a great success. Because I take the risk of investing in finishing this product, which means that you have taken the risk of designing it, I take the risk of manufacturing it, and if it's a success, we all get something, but if it's not a success, you don't get anything. And that's fine as long as there is one person who's behind the chair, and as long as you make products which are good enough to actually become success, but that's just the case for very, very few designers. The very moment you make something which is complex and where there's 10, 15, 20 people involved, you cannot use that model. So you need a different way of working. And then you can say, yeah, but we can just charge by the hours, as the others do, which is good if we can. But I think that we need to find a way where designers can do what they have always done, but just in a way which makes it possible for designers to actually live from their profession. I know that in Denmark, the average income for a designer is just about 5% higher than unemployment benefit. That's not impressive. They have 6 years education, and their salaries are almost half of the average designer of someone who took business school, which is also 6 years. So designers have not managed to find a way of working which makes them sort of able to make a good living out of design. And that's one of the challenges that we have. And then we also have this situation that what is design? That discussion we won't take, but are designers artists? Are they creatives? Are they problem solvers? Are they consultants? What are they? Is design cultural policy, or is it trade and industry policy? Where does design belong? It belongs a little bit here, a little bit there. In most countries in Europe, it's part of the cultural policy. But it's very difficult to discuss this kind of issues in a Ministry of Culture, because that's not their interest. They think about art, they think about design as an art. So we have to sort of discuss where does it belong and how do we make policy sort of reflect what's going on. We have, until 2007, design did not exist in the EU agenda. There was no design policy, and design statistically was part of other technical services. It didn't exist as a profession, it didn't exist as a service in itself. It does now, but we have a challenge of actually proving that it belongs on that agenda, and that it deserves to get funding and support just like all the other industries that does. And then we have some barriers. I'll go some faster through it. Procurement. You know that word procurement? That's how something is being bought, how something is being purchased by a client. Since more and more design is being bought by the public sector, we have a big problem, and that is that the way that the public sector buys services is very strange. Very often they try to pool as many organizations as possible so that you get a very big order and you can buy at a very low price. And that is something which makes it almost impossible for designers to be part of that. And it's also something which makes it less likely that design will be part of the criteria for buying that service. We have some big problems with labor markets. The labor market regulations in most countries is based on either you work or you don't work. You know, either you are employed or you are not. But designers, they are very often, one day they work on their own, next day they teach a little, the third day they're part of a project, the fourth day they do something, you know, they are all over the place. And they don't fit into that system. And it's not only designers, it's all creatives. It's also filmmakers, it's game makers, it's all the creatives. They do not fit into the labor market legislation that we have. We don't have any funding schemes. If you want to build a business, you need money. If you are a medical company, it's all about having a patent so that you have a drug that can save the world or cure cancer or something. And if you have something which you believe can do that, you can go to venture capitalists or big funds and you can get €1 million or 2 million rubles or 10 million, 100 million, whatever. You can get basically as much money as you want as long as you have a good case. Designers, very often, they don't need that kind of money. They need perhaps 50,000 rubles to set up a small studio. But there's nowhere you can go to get that kind of money, because either you get big money or you don't get money. So there are no funding schemes which fits into the way that creatives work. That's a difficult thing, but this is about how do politicians and bureaucracy, how do they talk about design? And it's very much linked to what I talked about earlier. They talk about it as culture, do they talk about it as a way of creating growth or jobs? And right now they talk about it only as a growth maker. And that is very difficult for designers to relate to, because design is so much more than just creating economic growth. And then the biggest barrier is the design industry itself, because the design industry itself is not able to get their act together. Design industry is not very interested in their own future. You are interested in your own future because you're here. All the other empty chairs, they are not here. And why is that? Well, they don't know that this is happening or something. But in general, designers are not very interested in being part of these discussions. Designers are, at least in Scandinavia, designers are the professionals who spend the least money on education after they graduate, on courses, on all kinds of sort of upgrading their professional. They think that when they have got their paper, they have become designers, that's it. But you can see how fast things change in this environment, and if you don't invest in your own future, you cannot be part of this. So design industry itself is a great barrier for the design industry to actually make a difference. But then there are some fantastic opportunities. Design is now all over the place. Everyone talks about design. So there's a focus and an attention about design, which means that we have a window of opportunity that we really need to exploit. There's a political awareness around design which never been there before. It's also coming in Russia. I had some meetings yesterday, and even in the political, both in St. Petersburg but also on a national level, people start talking about design. There has been talking about what kind of role will design play for the Sochi Olympics, for example. And that's a discussion which takes place in Kremlin. So I mean, there is a certain focus on design even in the Russian political domain. And that political awareness is a great opportunity if we just play our cards right. There is a great focus on users and co-creation. And who should do that? Who should help with that if it weren't for the designers? Because that's what designers do. There's a great focus on balancing these people, profit, and planet. That's the whole sustainability issue. How can you make products and services which both respect nature, which are socially responsible, and which also are profitable? The whole idea of balancing different interests, that is what designers have always done. Materials, manufacturing, user, aesthetics, all that. And then we have one opportunity which is fantastic, and that is until only a few years ago, we didn't have any proof that design actually works. Yes, we did. We knew that we liked it. We knew that people were crazy about design, but we couldn't prove it. Now we have actually research that shows that companies who use design, they make more money, they have higher exports, it's easy for them to recruit the best people, they have more leaner processes, they score higher than companies who do not use design on all measures. And that is not proven. We know that that's the case. So that knowledge, as that slowly moves into the consciousness of companies, then there is hope for design. Okay. For all this to sort of make sense, we have to ask ourselves three questions. One is, exactly what is it that designers deliver? What are the actual delivers? Is it, you know, what are the deliverers of design in the design industry? What is the uniqueness of it? What is it that you bring to the table which is unique, that no one else can bring to the table? And how do we ensure that these unique qualities are brought back into that design thinking, into that idea that it's all about the process, it's not so much about the outcome. That's what I want you to work with. Do you understand the questions? Because then I propose that instead of doing this and then make a break, we split you into two groups. I mean, it doesn't make sense to split you into more, or you can decide on being one group around the table. I don't care. But I want you to discuss among yourselves, and you can do it in Russian. It's much easier. As long as you tell me what you discussed in English. What are the deliverables of designers in the design industry? I mean, not what you do when you go to the studio, but if you should sort of sell the idea of using designers, what is it that you would tell, or what would you say that is the unique deliverable of someone who has actually spent 6 years in a design school? What is it that they can, what is it they can deliver which is different and more valuable than what a lot of others can deliver? And how can we make that sort of resonate with and blend with that thinking with the MBA community has, that it's just about making lean processes, making things smarter? How can we take whatever you discuss here and make that something which blends with design thinking? Do you understand that question? The challenge. It's not like, I don't expect you to come up with a clear answer that I can go to Putin and say, okay, listen, Vladimir, this is what you need to do. But I really want you to come up with some of your thoughts about this, because then we will hold it up against this later on. And then you can make tea while you're doing it, and then we'll have the break and the exercise in one, so that we spend our time wisely. Is that okay?
Yes, okay.
Are you okay?
Can you explain the last question?
Huh?
Can you explain the last question?
Yeah. This,
Yes.
we, as I said, we have been very good at telling both industry and others that design is not just about making nice stuff. It's also about how you do it. And that designers, they do this in a very special way. They use methods like engaging the users, taking the users into the process. They do prototyping. They work in circles and iterations. They don't only work in a straight line. They work with a visualization and representing stuff, so that they sort of focus much more on understanding the user and the issue before they make something. That process has now been adopted by the business community, and that's what they call design thinking. So they have said, okay, these designers, they do something which is quite smart. So why don't we do that as well? And they have started doing it, which is good. But the problem is that then very often they say, but then we don't really need the designers, do we? So how can you argue what it is that designers are unique at, are good at, and argue that that should coexist with that design thinking? They are two different things, and how can they work together?